Fabulous. I'll just get started. Um, First of all, welcome to everyone on the call joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bidjigal people as the traditional custodians of the land I'm joining from today and pay my respects to elders past and present. This country has always been a place of teaching, of learning and knowledge sharing, and that continues today. I honor the enduring physical and spiritual connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to this land, water, sky, and community. I also extend that respect, of course, to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today on Zoom. So my name is Armine Nalbandian, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of the Center for Social Impact. For almost 2 decades, the Center for Social Impact has worked alongside charities, social enterprises, government, business, and philanthropy to strengthen the foundations for social change in Australia through research, education, and engagement. Thank you again for joining us on the webinar. This is about the social economy. The question here today is this a framework for change or just another label? And today is an important milestone for CSI as we launch our inaugural report on Australia's social economy. This is the first research of its kind in the country and is a baseline survey that will be repeated for the next 2 years. It will provide the first comprehensive mapping of Australia's social economy and starts to highlight what we know about the sector's collective impact and significance. So today we'll unpack what this means for Australia, and through our fantastic panel, we'll begin to explore the big question driving today's conversation: is the social economy a framework for change or just another label? Now, to help us navigate this, I'm delighted to be joined by an absolutely outstanding panel of experts, each a leader in their field, and they will bring diverse perspectives and certainly challenge our thinking. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to the Honourable Dr. Andrew Leigh, Assistant Minister for Productivity, Competition, Charities and Treasury, Dr. Cassandra Goldie AO, CEO of the Australian Council of Social Service, Melina Morrison, CEO of the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals, Andrew Davies, CEO, B-Lab Australia and New Zealand, Kylie Flamont, CEO, Social Enterprise Council of New South Wales and ACT, and Associate Professor Mel Edwards, Director of Research and Innovation at the Center for Social Impact at UNSW. So welcome to our panel. Now, we'd absolutely love to hear from the audience today as well. So as we go, please share your reflections in the chat, and we will now get kicked off. So we'll hear from Associate Professor Mel Edwards on behalf of the Center for Social Impact Network. Mel is the chief investigator on our new research report on Australia's social economy and is also, as I mentioned, research and innovation director of our CSI UNSW team. Over to you, Mel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction, Armine. And I'd also like to acknowledge the extensive collaboration that has gone into this piece of research, both from colleagues around the various nodes within the Centre for Social Impact and also the sector leaders, some of who are on the call today, and others who have been part of that consultation process in the design of our survey tool, as well as the many different organisations that actually contributed to round one of the survey. So we're here because of the research itself. So the research is positioned in this context of the urgent social innovation, large-scale challenges like entrenched disadvantage, housing stress and climate adaptation, challenges that continue to place pressure on purpose-driven people who are generating civic wealth. Yet we question, are we actually underinvesting in these very organisations that are best placed for these types of locally place-based just transitions? This is where the social economy comes in and shines. Our definition of the social economy includes charities, not-for-profits, social enterprises, cooperatives, mutuals, and philanthropic organisations, which are all driven by a social and environmental mission. They reinvest surplus and profits operating across all service sectors, from education, food and hospitality to housing and the arts, and they exist to serve communities rather than shareholders. Their social dividends are for us and for future generations. In round one of the research, CSI was seeking to establish a national baseline for this concept in Australia by surveying a random sample, cross-section of these social economy organisations to understand who they are, how they operate, what they need for finance, investment, sustainability and collaboration, and indeed, if they can be considered as a whole for essential service delivery for us now and in the future generations. So here's what we found in our sample. Most were small community-based organisations, highly mission-driven, but financially constrained. No surprising there for some perceptions in the field. Around half of them have 10 staff or fewer and relying on volunteers, yet by annual expense, many are large, especially in the charities and not-for-profits sector, signalling concentrated social value distribution. They spans diverse fields, and the top areas in the survey sample were in community development, job creation, education, family, and youth services. In round one, we actually found sizing quite difficult because there were various different definitions around who is and is not part of the social economy, and differences in the way that by governance structure, those organisations are categorised. So we use publicly available sources, and there's this estimation of anywhere between 5,500,000 organisations and or 300,000 social economy organisations. There's quite a lot of variety in that definition. Amongst our sample, however, we found 5 key findings that I'm just going to highlight, and they're in the report. So the first one being the financial paradox. The majority of funding comes from government grants, followed by sales and fees, and then donations. But competition is fierce, especially for grants and donations, and uncertainty around these is extremely high. Funding stability and diversification were the top priorities across the board, with maintaining funding or revenue rated as the #1 priority for organisations over the coming 12 months. We also found that organisations were engaged in collaboration, but emphasised that this is often without support. So 85% of organisations had collaborated in the last year, often with multiple partners too, so complex collaborations. Mostly we found partners were not-for-profits or charities in that collaboration. Their main motivation was not about funding, but to expand their reach and improve the quality of their services. A common theme being the administration and the development of this collaboration potential is often not adequately funded or undervalued. We also found that the cooperative potential was underutilised. This came up both in the qualitative responses, where cooperatives and mutuals, although often central to policy in the UK and EU in social economy, were underlooked. And in terms of the types of partner organisations, they were the less connected to the other types of organisations across the sector, although they hold high potential for inclusive innovation. Measuring impact, again, we asked about the type of assessment and how it's resourced. So when it comes to impact assessment, about 3/4 are trying to track their outcomes, but they often lack the resources for any form of deeper evaluation. When it comes to staffing, for most it's not a standalone function, and also they're using and often adopting external frameworks, such as outcome frameworks from various different levels of government, where there are sometimes conflicting reporting requirements, and large-scale indicators like the SDGs, which often are difficult to translate at the local level. Only 1/4 reported using any advanced types of methods like program logic models, economic evaluations, or RCTs. Finally, the role of government came up quite a bit in the qualitative responses in particular, with the main focus being on the standardisation of incentives, particularly related to things like DGR, which is currently under review, and other standardised reporting, particularly across those levels of government, as I just mentioned before. So the question we have at the end of round one is, are our policies appropriately costing and valuing the social innovation support systems for the social economy? Are we valuing the right things? Do we have the means in order to be able to put the proper value on the social goods like wellbeing, housing security, and economic empowerment, or track the social costs avoided when things actually do go right? It's a challenge we're seeking to take on in round 2 and 3 of the survey in collaboration with the sector. And we're really excited for the panel discussion today, and also the feedback we've received so far on round 1. So please look out for our survey, which we anticipate to come out in September. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mel, for that overview of the year 1 research results. We'll link to the research report later on to give you all an opportunity to read it for yourself. And now over to the rest of our panel to begin the discussion. And I'll start with you, Minister Leigh. Minister Leigh, does a traditional productivity lens put the right value on the social economy, or are there a set of measures that could readily point to the total value or social benefit of the social economy?
Well, Amine, thanks very much for having me as part of this really fascinating discussion. It's appropriate that the Centre for Social Impact is putting the social into the economy and opening up a really broad conversation. I acknowledge too, I'm speaking from the lands of the Ngunnawal people and addressing you today, and how much fun it is to be one of the 2 token Andrews on a panel which is like the community sector dominated by women. One of the things I've sought to do since coming to office as Assistant Minister for Charities is not just to end the war on charities, which persisted for 9 years under the former government, but also to put in place a series of policies that collaborate with the social sector. We've done this by increasing the channels through which people can get deductible gift recipient status, streamlining the process for 4 important categories of organisation. We've created the category of community foundations, which is being used by a whole range of organisations in order to do more good where they live. We've engaged with states and territories around harmonising charitable fundraising laws, so organisations don't waste time complying with paperwork in 8 different states and territories. And we've set about ensuring that the Charities Commission is working with the community sector rather than against it, with the appointment of Sue Woodward as head of the Charities Commission and Sarah Davies as chair of the board, on which we brought more called First Nations and youth representatives. But as somebody who's responsible for both charities and for the Australian Bureau of Statistics, one of the things I'm most pleased about is the introduction of a regular general social survey. Australia has intermittently done the General Social Survey, but when we came to office, there were no fixed plans to conduct another one of them. As part of Treasurer Chalmers' commitment to wellbeing budgeting, we announced that we would put this survey in place regularly, and so we were able to track metrics that don't show up in GDP. GDP is one important indicator, but it doesn't capture everything. And Bobby Kennedy's quote is probably the pithiest expression of that concern. I don't think we want to try and shoehorn everything into GDP. Instead, we want to recognise its limitations and seek to buttress it with a range of other indicators. So the General Social Survey will look at the levels of trust in community, the level of engagement in social and political and cultural organisations. It will look at whether people have leadership roles and whether they're participating in these bodies. In short, it'll capture so much about our social fabric that isn't caught in standard economic statistics. And that's the nice thing about the social economy. Just as we worry a lot about the social fabric, the social economy can help to mend the tears in the social fabric. Just as the regular economy keeps us fed and clothed, so too the social economy ensures that our local sporting organisations are persisting. It ensures that our environment is better looked after. It ensures that the most vulnerable in the community are taken care of, something that I'm sure Cassandra will speak to. And the social economy also speaks to the value for us as a government committed to competition reform of bringing in new business models. So I'm really pleased that you've got Melina Morrison, one of the longest standing CEOs of an organised peak body in Australia, the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals, to talk about the important role that cooperatives and mutuals play. Now, I've visited cooperatives and mutuals with Melina and really value the work that the BCCM does in strengthening that sector. Social enterprises too have been a priority for our government, and one of the things we're reviewing as part of the Employment Services Review is whether there's better ways of bringing social enterprises into the employment services net. We understand that there's valuable ways of sustaining the social sector, such as the Victorian government's set aside for major procurements to go for a certain portion of contract funds to go to social enterprises. And we're interested in how we can better strengthen social enterprises. I won't touch too much on what Andrew Davies will say about B Corps, but I think they're a fascinating model which can be useful too. So very much looking forward to the conversation, very keen to broaden out those metrics and very enthusiastic about the potential for the social economy to do a power of social good.
Thank you so much, Minister Leigh, and thank you as well for your leadership in this space. I know all of us on the call appreciate that very much. Next up is Melina. So Melina, from your perspective, what does Australia lose when the social economy is treated as a nice to have rather than a key economic driver?
Oh, thank you very much, Amine, and everybody for this opportunity to join you today from Gadigal country. I'm really excited about the research. Congratulations to CSI for this groundbreaking research and your call to action to realise the huge potential. And I love this question because when we think about what's nice to have, if you think of this through the lens of, say, gender equality in the workplace, we know that if we don't have that, we literally lose half of what's holding up the sky. We lose the benefits of diversity and inclusion and the benefits that come from having a different mindset. And this also applies to corporate forms. If anything, we need to optimize the function of all types of corporate entities operating in the economy. And we know this is important when we reflect on the lessons of crisis. We might need to throw our minds back a bit, but if we think about the global financial crisis, we saw firsthand that when you have too many eggs, say in the basket of stock exposed entities in banking, then we created systemic risk. There was really important research on the back of the GFC into financial services resilience, which found that mutual banks and credit unions weathered the storm and came out stronger when many of their listed counterparts struggled for survival. And it was their different purpose and their different mindset that made the difference. In fact, their inherent conservatism and some of the barriers now to growth, like higher capital ratios, gave them less exposure to risky investments over short-term profits. So when we focus too narrowly on business structures that exist to maximize profits, we can overlook the contribution of organisations that focus on purpose, like cooperatives and mutuals, social enterprises, B corporations. And it's really substantial contribution, as CSI's research is showing. In fact, if we just take the cooperative and mutual sector and include member-owned super funds, which are part of this sector, then we're talking about 7% or so of the GDP of Australia. When we balance profits and community and social needs, focusing on sustainable principles and social progress, as social economy organisations do, we can target problems that are beyond government and market forces alone. And I can give you a couple of examples I've been thinking about, such as the delivery of aged care or disability care in remote and regional areas. We can't simply solve that by marketising services. We need business models that are incentivised to increase access in those so-called thin markets. Housing affordability is another area where social economy organisations can play a greater role. Our over-reliance on housing speculation to drive creation of wealth has, in effect, manufactured the problem that we now need to solve with housing inaffordability. So for me, the key term in all of this social economy is to really focus on the economy bit. Australia loses if we don't have a broad spectrum of corporate forms in the real economy. And I did read Dr. Leigh's op-ed in the Canberra Times this week, focusing on the different ways that productivity can be lifted. And it's not always about profit margins. We know it's about other things, other outcomes. Public sector productivity was an example that Andrew gave, isn't about profit margins. It's about outcomes that matter to citizens. The social economy exists to maximise benefits for stakeholders other than shareholders, and this allows the deployment of human and financial capital in ways that firms with a narrower focus, stakeholder focus, can't do. And social economy actors do one other really important thing, and I know this is close to Dr. Leigh's heart. The underlying conditions for enhancing our wealth as individuals and nations, such as social cohesion, democracy, equality, trust, need organisations which stimulate the idea of acting together for collective as well as self-interest. Social economy organisations distribute wealth rather than accumulating it. They trickle it up, if you like, and they mutualise benefits by entering markets which are not suited to economic actors, which can't make the economic case for operating in a so-called thin market. And I think we can really see that the market failure at the moment in childcare is where you can have perverse outcomes and misconduct and governance failures when we allow the proliferation of certain types of firms that have a profit motive over purpose to flourish. So finally, and I know we're keeping to a strict timeline. We know, and particularly governments know, that trust in systems are vital to healthy, thriving democracies where people are incentivized to work together. Social economy actors can restore the trust because they do what they say. They have one beating heart, if you like. They don't suffer from the tension between capital owners and beneficiaries. They bring the two stakeholders together. And finally, and again, another lesson I've learned from Dr. Leigh, when we measure economic activity, we need to focus on measuring what matters. And if we're not measuring the social economy, it won't matter. So again, I'd like to commend CSI for turning our focus to measuring this vital part of the sector and seeing it flourish and grow. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Melina, and thank you for your powerful provocations there as well. Now over to Dr. Cassandra Goldie. Cass, from your lens, could the social economy enable greater coordination between organizations that are improving community services and provision of care?
I mean, look, thank you. I'm just acknowledging that I'm here in Launceston on the land of the Palawa people, and I've just come from the Tasmanian Council of Social Service annual conference, which has been full of a room of people deeply committed to the collaboration that you're highlighting. And I want to again thank the CSI for producing this important research, because it really highlights, again, some of the critical issues that are faced by the community services sector and the social economy. And the good news is it underpins some very important work that we've already done. In the first term of the Albanese government, the community sector worked with Assistant Minister Leigh on developing the not-for-profit blueprint, which has at its heart three goals. This was sector-led. It identified first, how do we get an enabling environment to deal with the regulation chaos, which can be a real problem in undermining efficiency and us getting on with what we are there to do. Secondly, the goal is we want this to be a community that is people-led and purpose-driven. So those are the values that underpin what we do and why we do it. And third, that we're adaptive and dynamic. And I am, so this is a blueprint. We're going to be taking this blueprint for reform into the Economic Reform Roundtable next week. I am one of the people who'll be attending the Treasurer's 3 days in that cabinet room. And I wanted to highlight today that I'll be drawing on this research to help make the case for us fundamentally rethinking where we've been for the last 2 decades on delivering critical human services that are about improving the lives of people and communities and the planet. I think we've had this arm's length approach to competition, as if somehow competition will deliver all the benefits. Well, I think what we've all learned is that arm's length competitive tendering has actually been very damaging in many ways for us focusing on the kind of productivity that we really want to see within the human services environment, which of course is great quality and really great outcomes for people. And as others have named, you know, the examples we've had of failures in aged care and childcare and employment services is another one. We want to highlight that we are up for doing a fundamentally different approach to how we commission these essential human services that do put collaboration at the heart, that are very deeply relational, and that are very focused on what really matters in terms of productivity about both quality and outcomes. And I think the Treasurer's commitment to a wellbeing framework for the economy is a real platform from which we can build this. And I'll certainly be speaking to that going into the roundtable next week, because for all that we have experimented with, as I say, this notion of counting GDP, we can prove the GDP benefits that come from the social economy. I mean, we employ 1 in 10 workers. We contribute over 200 billion, almost 8% of GDP. We're a bigger contributor to the economy than the combination of the mining sector, the agriculture sector, the fisheries sector. We're as big as retail. So it's a very important part of the economy and its contribution to GDP. But that's not what really matters. What really matters is what is happening for people and communities, both in terms of people who are really struggling, but also great employment outcomes, and the governance over the economy. And so I think that's where us rethinking and taking a very different approach to the commissioning of these critical human services, which, for example, has in the governance workers, has in the governance participants and users. And these are the kinds of models that I know we're talking about today, of where we have, instead of it being all about shareholder value, and often where it's primarily driven by profit, which can be going offshore, we're reinvesting over and over into better and better outcomes for our communities. And so this is very useful research for us to help to elevate that these are the critical issues that we see and what we want to change in order to get better outcomes. Definitely a more collaborative environment is at its heart. And I'm just, as I say, stepped out of the Tasmanian Council of Social Service Conference, and that was a really powerful story for all the workers in that room, because they are desperate and desiring to collaborate, but far too often the contracting arrangements, the operating environment has undermined that rather than fostered and encouraged it. So we're at a very important opportunity, I think, with the not-for-profit blueprint in place. Very clear, we're ahead of the other sectors. We've got a lot of great clarity about what we need to do to lift up our version of what productivity means. And then I think with this second term at the federal level, putting at the heart of it an opportunity to really get far greater value from public expenditures in these really critical areas that are about people and communities. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cass. And indeed, collaboration and the challenges of collaboration are one of the themes that we've picked up in the research report. So thank you for raising that as well. Now over to the other Andrew. Andrew, what are the implications of classifying certified B Corps as part of the broader social economy sector?
Yeah, thanks, Amine. And I love, here comes the other Andrew, middle-aged white guy, to talk about the interests of for-profit business. So I'll lean into that role. I'm on Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country in Naarm in Melbourne here, coming at you from Collingwood. So it's such an interesting conversation. It strikes me, we haven't actually named the other economy if we're going to sort of split this. And I don't know if it's the anti-social economy, but it's an interesting maybe sidebar to pick up later. But I think it is really important that we do see the whole picture. And I think that's where B Corps can play a really important role. So for those that don't know, certified B Corporations or B Corps are for-profit businesses that operate to high standards of social and environmental performance, transparency and accountability. B-Lab, the organisation I work for, sets those standards and assures performance against them or verifies performance. Once certified, B Corps join a global community and a movement of businesses, and all across the world we mobilise that movement towards collective action to address some of society's biggest challenges, and a big part of that is a conversation about the role of business. An important part of becoming a B Corp is that you have to commit to a public benefit purpose and stakeholder engagement, and that's through actually amending your company constitution. That's a very specific part of the certification. It's designed to tackle what we see as a kind of a source code error in modern capitalism, which is this idea that a few people have touched on around the role of profits or shareholder primacy. So I think the idea of engaging with a social economy is a really important part of rewriting some of the cultural norms that dominate what we expect from business, and therefore how people in business behave. And in this conversation, there is a really important dialogue around legal forms. You're a charity with a DGR status, a not-for-profit, a private company, and sometimes those legal forms have really important implications for what you do, and certainly that's the case with mutuals and co-ops. But sometimes I think we can over-index on what you are, and that draws us into sometimes some unhelpful narratives or some fixed mindsets of therefore what you need to do or how you need to behave. And most particularly since the 70s, when more or less my lifetime, if you're keeping count, we've seen that the role of for-profit businesses have really become hyper-focused on short-term profit generation, unaccountable for their direct negative impacts. And for a time in the 80s and 90s, we celebrated those business leaders who were really good at pushing those boundaries. I think we are at a stage where we're looking for much more nuanced leadership from people in business. And one of the biggest challenges from CEOs these days is negotiating social debates or how to navigate sustainability commitments. And I think that's a sign of progress. But there's also a really deeper history here. So there's the long-standing debate about the role of the corporation as a legal construct, the responsibilities of people in charge. And it didn't start or end in the 1970s when Friedman wrote his famous New York Times essay and captured this idea of driving shareholder returns is really the sole purpose of a business. And if anyone really, there was a brilliant essay from Justice Gordon in the Harold Ford lecture in 2023 that Justice Gordon, she did a beautiful job of really drawing into the history and essentially answered the questions that said there's a conversation we need to have around the role of purpose in business in Australia because the law does not answer it for us. And so for me, what's exciting here is that the narratives regarding the role of business or people running businesses, they're not fixed in the shareholder primacy form. And in the last decade, we've seen a lot of change. We've seen responses to social and environmental destruction from businesses. We've seen a huge uplift in regulation. And I think the truth that we've come to appreciate of a global interconnected economy is that it means we are hyper-connected to other businesses and other people in other parts of the world. So some of those old truisms of running a business is all about coming up with a great product and a brand and then just winning, they're not serving us very well. Those narratives have changed, and it's businesses that have really good relationships through their supply chain, for instance, that can navigate some global challenges much more effectively. So I see progress in that. But to come back to forms for a moment, there is a fundamental legal bargain at play when you adopt a corporate form. You engage in an economic activity through that entity. You receive protection from liability, special taxation treatment. You get rights. Companies can sue people, own property, and so on. But you also accept certain obligations, duties, and you operate within a society that sets the kind of cultural norms for those businesses. So you cannot escape the reality in running a business that there is a social compact at play and that you are therefore a moral actor. And when we lose sight of that, we enter a world where the only solution is to regulate business, and it becomes an impossible game because regulation is usually late and always insufficient. We're not going to regulate our way to getting business to operate in a sustainable way for the long term. So I do think we need new narratives of the role of business and not to trap ourselves in a bifurcation of the for-profit or anti-social economy and the social economy. And in this context, B Corps and other models like social enterprise are more than just a kind of fringe movement of values-led entrepreneurs who are just willingly doing things differently. I think they're a window into the future of what a different economic system can look like. And so our approach to modern business, I think, has become so accustomed to the idea of embracing thoughtlessness and carelessness, and even the idea of ethical decision-making is too often suppressed. So this conversation to me is not just about defining and celebrating the benefits of a social economy, but asking ourselves questions of how can we introduce some of the cultural norms and practices and the way of thinking into the broader economy and ultimately usher in a new system instead of continuing to see a sort of bifurcation or a competitive element where the social economy corrects the wrongs of the other one. So it's a really important conversation, and like the other speakers, I think the research and the fact that it's longitudinal has started and will continue to tell a really important story.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Those reflections are really interesting, particularly given your background and where you're coming from in this conversation. So thank you for that thoughtful response. Now over to Kylie. Kylie, what is the role of social enterprises in the social economy? Certainly play an interesting mix of all of these sorts of areas. So really interested in hearing from you about the role of social enterprises in the economy, in the social economy.
Thanks, Amine. And there are so many directions I want to go in, but only have 5 minutes, so I'll do my best. So a social enterprise is a business that puts people and planet first. They trade like any other business, but they exist specifically to make the world a better place. So if you think of it like a spectrum, you've got sort of the very profit maximizing end of business, and then you've got the absolute social good end of charity. And, you know, B Corps are a better form of business. Social enterprises sort of start to bridge that gap between or bridge the dichotomy that we used to have for a period of time between business and charity. So someone I used to work with used to say that a social enterprise, if a business and a charity had a baby, that is a social enterprise, which is a really easy way for most people to understand what it is. Recently, I've started drawing this Venn diagram, and I was drawing it so often, like at least once a week, people would ask me about business versus B Corp versus social enterprise. And I kept drawing this Venn diagram over and over in my notebooks, and eventually I put it on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. And so you've sort of got businesses, you know, when I did my undergrad, when I did my MBA, it was all about doing well, making money. That's the number one reason that businesses exist. Social enterprises exist to do good. So do well is your traditional business. Do good is your social enterprise. You have a particular social or environmental challenge that you exist to help solve. And then B Corps are being good. So it's about how they run their business, are being responsible, and how they're treating people on the planet. And a social enterprise really has to do all three. So you have to do well, you have to trade, make money in order to have the whole engine work. You have to do good, that is the point of a social enterprise, and you have to be good in how you're doing it. It's fascinating to me that I'm reading a book. I've been asked to review a book before it's published, which is the first for me, and it's on the history of ESG. And in it, they talk about in the 1600s when companies were first invented, so the Dutch East India Company, etc. In order to register a company, you had to show the social benefit. It was not about profit maximization for the owners. It was about the broader social impact. And somehow along the way, we've lost that. For a while there, I think we also lost sight of the point of money. You know, money was invented as a means for me to swap my apples with your gardening services with someone else's whatever, ironing, babysitting, whatever. Money is a tool, not a goal. Money is a means for us to move goods and services around. But for a couple of 100 years, we suddenly made money the goal. So the accumulation of wealth for a company, profits, or for an individual as wealth became the goal, which is just crazy when you think about it. And I think, you know, in a generation or two, we'll look back and think that this blip in human history where we just went completely off track was an error, and we have an opportunity now to course correct. So in my mind, I don't think that we should have any businesses that don't put people and planet first. When you have organizations like we've had over the last few decades who can pursue profit maximization as their only goal, then you have to Andrew's point, both Andrew's, but mainly Andrew Davies, you have to keep regulating to curb the worst behavior. So as we've seen in all of the care industries over the last decade or so with royal commissions and parliamentary inquiries and Four Corners investigations, when you pursue profit, of course, bad things are going to happen to people on the planet. People will find ways to reduce costs by cutting corners, which means, you know, worse meals, less care, etc., for people with disability, aged care, childcare, employment services, or increase revenue by rorting systems. When you have a social enterprise model that is truly putting people and planet first, that doesn't happen. And when you are purpose-driven as an entire organization, you don't need to be regulated to care for people. You don't need to be regulated to do the right thing with your waste or your energy, or how you treat your suppliers. And so I think we know now that trickle-down economics is a myth, that capitalism has gone too far. Social enterprises are really interesting and effective way to take the very best tools and processes of business, but apply them to do good. Happy to jump into other parts of that discussion, but I know we're short on time, so I'll stop there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kylie, and for sharing that Venn diagram as well. I see somebody has done that in the chat. Now, we are relatively short on time, and I know there are lots of discussions and questions in the chat. I might just close by throwing to Mel before I close off the call. Mel, from what you've heard from the panel today and given your own research into the social economy, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up? And in particular, there seems to be a couple of questions in the chat about how we can achieve clarity instead of confusion, given the many different conflicting labels used in relation to the economy.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Amine, and thank you so much to all the panelists. I think one of the dreams we had at the beginning of this research was that the social economy as a concept might bring together the, what we might call subsectors in order to create some kind of cohesion or definition around social economy. And yeah, there are always been multiple labels and ways of talking about what I think is the substantive thing that everyone on this call is really getting to today, and that is as an economy, we're looking at the kind of like the inputs and outputs in the production and consumption of goods and services. And I think the questions we're asking here are really around what is the purpose of the way in which we classify and categorize the inputs and outputs in, and how do we prioritize the kinds of products and services, and that needs to be based on the outcomes that we want to see through the lens of the social. And there are values that kind of sit in front of that lens as well. In the next rounds of the research, that's something that we want to look at, and we want to understand a little bit more. We're intending to put some questions in there as well around how people actually are tracking indicators. What indicators are they tracking? If we can't first of all define the data, and we can't see the field, it's very hard for us to see comprehensively the valuation of this thing called a social economy. And also, if we don't have very good ways of thinking about inputs and outputs and how they do translate into the types of outcomes that we want to see as a society and as communities, we also don't really have very good ways of like pulling the levers in order to make sure that we're having the best distribution. So we talk about social value creation, and we talk about social value distribution as well. And some of the reasons why we also need to look at it at that governance level is because different forms of organizations do have different distributive mechanisms, and we need to take that into consideration and account. It's not just about the indicators themselves, but also the how, the sort of drivers of that economic activity as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mel, for those reflections. A huge thank you to our panelists. Can you give them a round of virtual applause, please, for the richness of the perspectives you've shared and for inspiring us with the possibilities ahead. Today's conversation, I think, has demonstrated to us that the social economy is not just a label, but could perhaps be a living framework for building a fairer, more sustainable Australia. Let's take the insights, the energy and connections from this discussion back into our work so that together we can advance an economy that better serves people, communities, and the planet. Once again, a huge thanks to the research team led by Mel at CSI UNSW and across the CSI network. You made this happen. And of course, most importantly, to the social economy organizations who generously gave their time to fill out the survey. I know we sometimes have survey fatigue, but I want you to know that this is the sort of outcome when you fill in out a survey that we start these kind of more strategic conversations about where we want to go in Australia. So as Mel mentioned, for those of you working in the social economy sector on the call, we'd love to have your voice in the next round of our social economy survey when it's released next month. Your input will help us build an even clearer picture of the sector's impact and needs. Before we close, just a quick reminder that the recording of today's webinar will be shared with you shortly. Again, you can download our inaugural social economy report from the Center for Social Impact's website. Thank you all for being part of today's discussion. Your engagement and contribution are what make this work possible. See you next time. Thank you.